Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast episode on Mindfulness Eases the Journey of Menopause. A reminder that our podcasts should not be construed as medical advice. Today, we have a very special guest joining us for another mindful conversation. We're so grateful to have you, Dr. Keira Bar, join us and to share your wisdom and expertise on mindfulness and menopause.
Well, I'm super excited for this conversation. Thank you for having me.
So, as usual, we'll start with our intention. And our intention for today is to learn about how mindfulness can ease some of the transitions, both of life, but especially of menopause.
We hope that you will discover allowing and accepting, honoring, and feeling through your experience of menopause, while sometimes challenging, is actually a healthy way to traverse this inevitable stage of life.
And takeaways from today's episode are hopefully that you can shift some of your thinking about menopause. Maybe it doesn't have to be so challenging or bad or a struggle or a loss. And maybe you can use mindfulness to help you traverse the process more easily, and some mindful intention to possibly tell a better story about menopause.
Welcome, Keira. We're so happy to have you today.
I am super excited for this conversation. It's going to be hot, right? That's such a bad joke. But I feel like menopause has become a hot topic these days.
Absolutely. Will you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So my background is that I'm a dual board certified dermatologist and have done kind of a mini menopause mentorship fellowship over the past over the pandemic. Mind body medicine practitioner. I don't know, like all of us doctors, right? We just keep acquiring certifications. You just need more and more. And the focus of my work right now as a life coach and mind body medicine practitioner is really to support the emotional and mental well-being of women transitioning through menopause. Because what I found when I was diving deep into the clinical medicine of menopause and prescribing bioidentical hormones, the theme that kept coming up is that even when hormones were balanced on paper, while the labs looked good, women were still struggling with feeling overwhelmed, anxious, exhausted, struggling in their relationships. And I thought, all right, there's so much more than pills, prescriptions, and other things. Like there's this gap and we need to address it. And as physicians, this is a big gap in, I think, our education, and we have to learn the hard way of how to support ourselves when it comes to our emotional and mental well-being, not just the physical.
Yeah, and I wanted to share a little bit about my menopause journey because I'm actually in surgical menopause as of age 39. And it was as a result of finding an unexpected ovarian mass during ovarian cancer screening because of my young age of diagnosis from breast cancer. And so I actually didn't know whether or not that ovarian mass was benign or malignant until after I got out of the operating room. So the GYN oncologist basically took me in and had said that if the pathology in the operating room was malignant, then it would be the full total abdominal hysterectomy with bilateral salpingo oophorectomies with extensive pelvic lymph node dissection, or just laparoscopic bilateral salpingo oophorectomy. So there was a lot of uncertainty going into that. And luckily, the mass ended up being an endometrioma. But because of my genetic implications, I was planning to have my ovaries removed anyway in my early 40s. And so wanting to avoid any further surgery. I was just like, just take them both out so I don't have to worry anymore. But as a result of that, I am in surgical menopause as of the last couple of years. So it's been a really interesting journey, and I have definitely tapped into my mindfulness reserve to help get through some of the more challenging times.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I too had a hysterectomy and was in surgical menopause in my early 40s. And I had no clue what was happening, right? Like for me, my story is a little different. And I'm so grateful that your physicians were proactive and with your breast cancer history and kind of taking maybe a proactive approach. And I'm grateful that everything turned out to be more in the benign realm with regard to the pathology they found. For me, it was my periods were getting really wonky. I was feeling anxious. I wasn't sleeping. It was kind of like having crime scene periods. Like it was just like a nightmare, and they went on for a really long time. And every practitioner, provider, physician that I went to, checking my hormone levels was not on the radar. We didn't discuss it. They're like, you're just, stressed at the time. Okay, back up a little bit. I was running ultra marathons. I hated my job. I was just like, I was literally running away from my problems. I realize this now. And what it all boiled down to was stress and the impact of all different types of stress on our bodies. For me, I was living in California at the time. I was running out in the outdoors. It was our exposome, the ultraviolet radiation. It was the over-exercising. It was the mental, emotional stress of not loving my job. It was being a mom to toddlers at the time and trying to juggle the career and all these things. And I had no idea that I was in quote unquote perimenopause. And also because of stress and, knowing the science of how our body produces hormones and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and my body being under stress, prioritizing cortisol, the stress hormone, shutting down basically all the other pathways, and basically robbing all my body's resources to produce the sex hormones. I was compounding what was naturally occurring in the perimenopausal phase of life, which can last anywhere from 4 years, 10 years, 15 years, and beyond. And kind of fast pacing that progression because of the stress that I was putting on my body. And my body was just trying to keep up. And my doctors never thought to check my hormones. Knowing what I know now, they should have been like, hey, this sounds like you're way low in progesterone. Here's some of that. That would really help. And like I had my uterus removed, and they found adenomyosis, endometriosis, fibroids. I mean, there was so much pathology there. And I had no clue. And I thought, okay, I'm a physician of 20 years now. And I had no idea what menopause was, no idea what perimenopause was, no clue about hormones. And so if I don't know what's going on as an educated physician, how is the average woman supposed to understand what's happening with her body? Like, we need to be talking about this more. We need to be able to support each other more. And knowing that for me, it really came down to stress and not being mindful, not listening to all the clues my body had been giving me for decades. Being able to help women connect the dots so that they really can tune in more, really use mindfulness to their benefit for not only preventative medicine, but also for healing.
100% yes. And I'm so grateful we're having this like open, vulnerable conversation about our stories with menopause. How about you, Jessie?
So I'm the only one who hasn't gone through surgical menopause, apparently. And I am in the perimenopause of many, 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 many years. I'm pleased that you said it can go on for 15, because I keep thinking this is just ever going on. But what I think is interesting is what you brought up about how most of us don't really know what it is and don't understand it. And yet we attribute in the world that I live in, everyone says it must be because you're in menopause. And I'm in my 50s. So that's like everyone just attributes whatever's going on to menopause, which may or may not be related. And I do think that mindfulness has really been helpful for me in sort of navigating that process, because I can also just say, oh, it must be menopause, and like try to just sort of, we kind of struggle through it and we see it as a challenge that's accepted. And yet that doesn't make the journey in and of itself more easeful. And so I think my journey has really been trying to step out of the comparative suffering and struggling around it and sort of the cultural norms around it, and really use mindfulness to look at it from afar and from the outside. And as a pediatrician, I also think, we talk a lot about like villages and helping people raise their children, but we don't really have the villages around this piece of our transition. And so I would love, mindfulness helps me kind of see who to ask and how I want to engage in the conversation. This actually feels a little bit like a village. But I'm inspired by that thought. And I think because it's gone on so long, that it really is another reason why mindfulness is really important. The other piece that I will find, since my experience is probably a little bit different, is that it does feel very much out of our control. And I think in our society now, we like to be in control. I do not like to be out of control. And yet it seems like, it's like, whoa, well, this is happening now and this is happening. And so a lot of the mindfulness work is to just ground into this is what's happening and that's okay. And it doesn't mean anything terrible. I think we jump right to anxiety and we jump right to the worry and what about this? And in my experience, and maybe it's because I grew up in a hippie, crunchy granola family, but everyone wants to give me meds. And I'm like, I don't want any meds. Like, this is going to take as long as it takes. I don't need to control it. But I just think there's all of this conversation and pressure. And that's where the mindfulness, just tapping into like the process of it and realizing, to me, it's kind of like raising teenagers. It's like that it's going to end at some point and then we'll be in a new phase. And we can sort of enjoy its bumps and lumps and goods and bads, just like teenagerhood. So I would love to hear your thoughts, just of any recommendations or words of additional wisdom, particularly maybe for people. I know we have listeners of all ages, but maybe people who aren't perimenopausal yet, like people looking ahead to menopause. Do you have any thoughts for that group?
Yeah. I mean, I never thought that I would be in the perimenopausal phase in my 30s. But here's what we know. Our hormones are constantly shifting. And on the downswing, starting in our 20s, 30s, your late 30s, you may start to notice. And so just understanding that your body is always in evolution and nothing has gone wrong, just like you said. Things are changing. That being said, there are a lot of lifestyle shifts and habits that we can adopt to help our body stay in better hormonal balance. I mean, when we think about, I always come back to stress because, listen, we teach best what we need to learn the most. I always need to say, like, I need to calm the F down. Like, I know this about myself. And that's why I lean so hard into this, because my tendency is to just be a worry wart and spin myself up. And so that is just going to crank up my sympathetic overdrive, shift me out of rest and relaxation right into, fight, flight, freeze, crank up my cortisol levels, which is going to shift all my other hormones. And when most of the time we think about hormones, we're talking about sex hormones, right? Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. But no, they're really a whole host of other hormones that can have a significant impact on our overall health and well-being as women as we are maturing. Cortisol elevates, it's going to shift your blood sugar regulation out of balance. Your insulin's going to be all wonky. Melatonin and cortisol, right? Cortisol is supposed to go down at night, up in the morning to get you out of bed and go. Melatonin is supposed to go up at night, down in the morning, so you can get your really rest and repair. For our skin, I mean, beauty sleep is real. Melatonin, we need this production at night to help rejuvenate and repair all the DNA damage that has been accruing over the day. And when we are stressed, it just shifts that balance. It shifts our circadian rhythm. Women in menopause, they're talking about, that menopause muffin top right around the middle. That is your stress hormones messing with your leptin and your ghrelin, your satiety and your fullness hormones. Like there are this, when we talk about hormones, it's this beautiful encompassing, realm of messengers that, even though we don't necessarily have control of when we're ultimately going to go through menopause and some of the things that may happen, we do have a lot of control over how to better keep some of these hormones in balance through prioritizing sleep and rest and nourishing our bodies with, whole foods, heavy on the plants, adding pleasure into our daily life. I always put in my calendar like pleasure first. And for me, oftentimes that's reading a passage in a book that my daughter, speaking of teenagers, my daughter gave me a book. It's on my shelf. It's Melody Beattie's Journey to the Heart. And every day has a passage and it's just an inspiration. I mean, it's these little simple things. Yes! Oh, I like looking at it. It's twinsies!
On my desk.
I love it. And I love that my daughter gave it to me because she knows I need to chill out. But it's the things that we actually can control to keep our bodies in what we call homeostasis, right? In some sort of balance, even though we're constantly evolving. So that was a very long-winded way of saying, we don't know when this is actually going to go down. Like in your case, you're in your 50s, like living the good life. You have no idea when that day. Menopause is literally just a day. It's a milestone, 12 months the day since your last period. And then you're in postmenopause. So we don't know when that day's going to come. But in the meantime, while you're ambling your way there, we can embrace the journey and make it a little more enjoyable along the way.
What I am gleaning from this conversation is that maybe even our idea of like perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause is a little bit artificial. And it's really, I always like to think of it as the journey. And I'm back to the idea of yoga and transitions, right? And the transition is just as important as, like, if you don't transition well, you don't get in the pose well, you can't balance well. And yet, especially the pediatrician in me, right? It's all transitions. It's like just getting to the next phase. And what if we didn't have a day where it's like, okay, we're going through menopause and it's really difficult. It's all transitions. And even my thought is, even with surgical menopause, right? It changes the hormones acutely, but your body's still going to be adapting and transitioning for quite some time. And, whether we're looking at, I have an idea that there's physiologic menopause and there may be a bit of emotional menopause too, right? Like as you are older and maybe you had surgical menopause earlier, but I was noticing yesterday's Halloween, my neighbors have all these young kids and everyone's posting all the photos of their young kids dressed up. And I don't have young kids dressing up anymore. And I don't have grandkids. And I was like, kind of in this like funny phase where there's, that's like, what do you do? And so it's just interesting. I think there is that piece of it as well. And then the other thing that really resonated is all the sort of solutions you mentioned, like sleep, rest, whole foods, pleasure. Mindfulness is what helps us figure out which of those we need and how to show up making good choices for those. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk about mindfulness and this idea of menopause, in that I actually looked it up yesterday. I use it for a lot of the symptoms and experience of menopause, and it's helped me tremendously through the lack of control and even sort of mindset management. But it turns out there's lots of research about it. I have to say I didn't read any of the articles, but I was super impressed when I typed it in, like just pages and pages. So I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation about that. I don't, maybe Ni-Cheng, do you want to just share a little bit about your experience bringing mindfulness to menopause? We can each take a turn.
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely helped me develop a healthier relationship with the inevitable changes of my mind and body. And we talked about control. So definitely kind of allowing and accepting that process. And I love that we're talking about all these different stages when it's really just a dynamic continuum of life. And rather than resisting or being angry or frustrated, which definitely I had moments of. I took the approach and welcomed it and accepted the change as part of mindfulness practice, and realizing that the surgical menopause that I am experiencing really was for me the price of survivorship. And definitely it's not to say that I didn't have my own moments of frustration with like an inopportune hot flash or poor quality of sleep. But with like the hot flashes, for me, mindfulness uh, reminds me to allow it to move through me, like labeling it, allowing it to pass. And then for sleep, because I definitely realized that I'm a much lighter sleeper now, there's a much higher likelihood for me to have more nighttime awakenings. So when I do unexpectedly awaken, I have now incorporated basically jumping into doing a self-guided body scan starting from my feet. And that has seemed to help me get back to sleep faster. So those are some of my experiences.
I love that because I tend to do the same thing. When I wake up in the middle of the night, I do a body scan. It's really soothing. That being said, there's certainly other supportive practices, because our sleep can be disrupted. I take some supplements that can be very helpful. I use magnesium at night. I am using bioidentical hormones. I take progesterone at night. I'm using adaptogens throughout the day to help even me out. So all of these things, in conjunction. And I think for me too, it's like my body was giving me these clues, right? This was the premise of why I wrote my book, The Skin Whisperer. I had to do more with the clues that my skin was giving me, that I was under stress, growing and changing pigmented lesions. And as a dermatologist, and at the time, the focus of my practice was skin cancer and melanoma, and having to diagnose myself with early melanoma was like my wake-up call. Then came all the hormonal debacle. And that's what led me into my exploration of functional integrative medicine and mindfulness, mind-body medicine, because again, I could feel frustrated. I could have regrets of all the things I could have done, should have done. And yet this was a window of opportunity to finally connect to what my body was telling me, what it needed, and be able to find safety within myself. I think as an individual, and maybe in medicine, I don't know, maybe this is just my experience, always looking for external validation, like an atta girl, like you did it, here you go, you got this grade, you're getting into this residency. And I never took a moment to trust that maybe I, knew what was best for me, or could succeed within myself. And I'm not saying that I wish health challenges on anyone to have these realizations, but I now can recognize what anxiety feels like in my body. I can recognize the aches and pains, and take a moment to pause and say, what is my body trying to tell me right now? What do I need? Even the fact that I'm putting my hands on my chest right now, I would have done that so unconsciously. And now I'm like, oh, look at that. I'm checking in. I'm soothing myself. I'm trying to have compassion and listen. And when one of my mentors pointed that out to me, I was like, what? That's what I'm doing? Our body just knows. And I think mindfulness creates this amazing opportunity to just reconnect and realize that our body know exactly what we need. Our brain might not, right? Because we like to disconnect. Sometimes our head is completely disconnected from our body. But when we take a moment and actually pay attention, your body will tell you exactly what it needs in that moment. And sometimes doing that body scan and just relaxing into it, and just without judgment, just noticing, paying attention. It's amazing. And hello, there's so many benefits of menopause. Yes, hot flashes can be inconvenient. Meditation can be amazing. There's actually showing hypnosis, biofeedback, just doing a meditation of just imagining like a cooling sensation washing over you. I mean, there's so many great things that we can do.
Have a hand to heart practice. And I think it really is to get out of your head and check in with yourself. And I wonder in this conversation about menopause is that so much of the conversations in menopause are about what's in our head. And also our physiologic responses are made worse. I'm hearing you repeat this also by being stressed about it and worrying about it and anxious about it and frustrated and thinking it should be different. And so that all of that piece, the physiologic piece, not in our control, but all of that piece is something that mindfulness can really help us step out of things. And we often say, I do a lot of mindful coaching, that things happen for you. And I almost wonder if this physiologic, natural human process of menopause, with all of these sort of clues, they're much louder than any other clues that we may have had along the way for most people, that it is like we have to stop and listen, and we have to pause and check in. And what if the hot flash was like, okay, well, how are you? What's going on? What do you need? I mean, it's almost like a physiologic alert. It strikes me as maybe there are a lot of things in it that are happening for us. And I've never thought about it that way, but I think it's going to help me a lot. That like, oh, this is my reminder. I need to check in when I'm getting really anxious. Or sleep is one for me that I think is really challenging, and finding different things that work, and waking up too hot and having to open the windows, and then I'm up, and then, it's like all of these. So it's maybe actually happening for me in the sense that I have to double tap into mindfulness to really think about, oh, okay, well, now I'm too hot. What else do I need? Rather than being frustrated, which is always my initial response. Can't believe I'm awake again, and, solve all these problems, and then I won't be able to go back to sleep. But maybe it's really exactly, I can see this as I'm explaining it, exactly what I need to work on. And that may be why it's happening.
I love that. And I think it really is a beautiful opportunity of like, how can I set myself up for success? I'm going to have hot flashes at this point in time. And so there are, thankfully, a lot of resources these days. Like I have a chili pad on my bed, which is just a glorified heating and cooling pad to like keep my bed cool. I've got the fan going. I have essential oils to like by my bedside that I can use as aromatherapy to soothe my nervous system. Having the room dark. So I have an eye mask. Like there's so many things that we can do to set our bedroom up as a sleep sanctuary and as kind of rescue treatments if we are having a hot flash. And I think too, when we think about menopause, we always think of it as like an ovarian issue, right? Like
it's failure. It stops working.
Like, yeah, our ovaries just aren't pumping out those sex hormones, but really it's a brain issue as well. I mean, hot flashes, our hypothalamus is really what helps regulate temperature. So when we have a hot flash, it's like a signal in your hypothalamus. It's not getting the signal it needs. Now our hypothalamus, right? We were talking earlier about stress response, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis. If we think about our brain being connected to our body and using mindfulness and kind of these stress reduction practices to help soothe our mind, giving it what it needs, it's going to soothe the body, right? That hot flash and the body. And so it is all connected, that it's not just your ovaries are failing. It's like, ooh, my brain isn't necessarily getting what it needs. How can I offer it support? What can I do? Because I know that when I'm mindful and paying attention and doing a body scan, when I'm doing some breath work or doing yoga, it just soothes those feel-good chemicals are coming up. It's soothing that stress response. It makes all the difference. And I really do think, listen, we need stress in our lives. We need it. We need it to get ourselves out of harm's way, for our motivation, all of these things. And it's really, I think what it comes down to, right, is stress perception. What are we making it mean when these things happen? How can we be more responsive than just reactive? Like, oh, it's very inconvenient. I'm presenting in front of a group and I'm sweating my ass off because I'm having a hot flash. And so sometimes you can embrace it. Like I use humor. That's I just find it, I can other people may not find me funny at all, but I can crack myself up. And honestly, it's like, sometimes it's just the way to get through the day and just working with your symptoms as if they're happening for you. Maybe it is like you just need to break the tension, make a joke, move on, and just accept this is what your body's offering you today. So how can we set ourselves up for success? What tools can we put in our toolbox, our mindfulness toolbox, to be able to help navigate this with a little more ease and grace and maybe a little humor?
I love that you talked about perception, and as both of you were talking about hot flashes and then even like ovarian failure, how interesting languaging around even menopause brings up like implicit and explicit judgments, when the reframe around a lot of what we go through in menopause can be more like reminders. So maybe instead of a hot flash, it's like a warm body scan that's mandatory at that moment in time. Or when we awaken from sleep, maybe it is an opportunity to incorporate some formal practice or for self-care. So I think that this is a wonderful conversation about even beyond that of menopause and mindfulness, but like how can we take care of ourselves through all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's because what happens, especially in the middle of the night when we have a hot flash, there's a cortisol spike, you've got an adrenaline surge. That's what makes your mind race, your heart beat a little bit faster, and you're awake, you are ready to go. And so just acknowledging or just being aware, like, oh, that's what's happening. Like, I'm not going crazy. Like, nothing's gone wrong. It's like, my brain didn't get the signal it needed. That hypothalamus didn't get the little surge that it needed. So, it set off the hot flash. And I know what comes next is this adrenaline surge. And so just, using your mindfulness, like, exactly what's happening. Nothing's gone wrong. And now what can I do to get myself back to sleep? And you can decide, like, I can make a conscious decision that if the hot flash for me, sometimes, 2 to 4 in the morning is a common time, but there are times where it's happened at 5. And I think to myself, should I try and soothe myself and go back to bed? Or should I leverage this adrenaline rush to my advantage and while everyone else is sleeping, have some quiet time to myself, right? It's like that reframe. How can I set myself up for success? And we get to decide what we want to do with this. But I think the biggest thing is understanding the physiology so that you can ease that anxiety. Nothing has gone wrong. Your body is so intelligent. It's doing exactly what it's meant to do. Not the most convenient time to be doing it in the middle of the night, but nothing has gone wrong. So that's at least the way I soothe myself at times, like just doing its thing. It's not on my schedule, but it's just doing its thing.
I love the idea of just embracing it and using it for you and being like creative with it. And I think that's a good time probably just to pop into our reflection questions about menopause and then hear any final words you have. But the one that I was going to share was, what if you intentionally changed your thoughts about menopause and saw it as like a new beginning or something to celebrate rather than getting old and problems to manage?
Heck yeah. I love that. Women, we spend about a third of our life in a hormone deficient state. My great grandfather was 104. So like, I'm not even halfway there yet. We have so much to celebrate.
Someone told me that it could be thought of as the pause that refreshes. And I was like, never thought of that.
And maybe that hot flash, that little bead of sweat, that is like your refreshing.
Yeah. Could be.
Your dewy, glowy, rosy complexion. Yeah.
Do you want to share your questions?
Yeah. So thinking about this present moment, dear listeners, what are your current thoughts about menopause? Thoughts and emotions, whether it's in the distant or near future or current or behind you already. And then how might you use mindfulness? We've given you some ideas. How might you use mindfulness to help you transition more easily, not just necessarily through menopause, but through all of life's stages?
And Keira, how can our listeners find out more about you and get in touch with you?
Yeah. Well, at the time that we're recording this, I'm actually have created a mindfulness course for women going through menopause. And so you can find me and information about this at my website, drkeirabar.com. I even have a guide, 7 ways to reduce anxiety in less than 7 minutes, because we need quick, easy, simple ways to manage our emotions on the spot. On Instagram at Dr. Keira Bar. So those are probably the best ways to find me.
Thank you so much, Keira. And we'll make sure that we have the information in the show notes.
Thank you.
As always, we appreciate you listening, following, sharing. And if you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave us stars and reviews. For free guided mindfulness meditations, please check out my website at awakenbreath.org. And if you're a healthcare professional and have not joined us yet at the Mindful Healthcare Collective, please do so at mindfulhealthcarecollective.com or via our Facebook group of the same name. Thanks so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us, Keira.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Please stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for Dr. Keira Bar's Mindful Moment offering.
As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
So welcome to today's mindful moment. Oftentimes we are tackling difficult subject of anxiety and worry. So I want to offer a meditation and a visualization for releasing some of the weight of worry and regret that we carry. So to help you reduce anxiety, I want you to start by taking a moment to relax your body. Just soften any unnecessary tension in your belly and your shoulders, and find a posture that feels both relaxed and alert. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or just a soft downward gaze, and rest your hands in an easy, effortless way. I just want you to take a few moments to scan your awareness for the sensations of your body. And wherever possible, just soften and release obvious areas of physical tension. Just being aware of your body breathing, your chest rising and falling with each breath. Now I want you to imagine that you're standing in the street outside of your home, and you're carrying 2 heavy suitcases. And know that one of those suitcases is full of worries about the future. And the other suitcase is full of regrets about the past. And I want you to take a moment standing there in the street, holding these heavy suitcases, one in each hand, and just reflect about each one. Reflecting about the future, how it'll come on its own accord whenever it comes, and that most of what we worry about will never happen. And standing out there in the street, reflecting about the past, and that other heavy suitcase in your hand, feeling the weight in your fingertips. And just consider how the past cannot be changed. All we can do in the present is to learn from it, put in whatever corrections make sense, become more skillful, evolve into a better version of yourself and move on. Now, standing there in the street, feeling the weight of these suitcases and absorbing the wisdom of your reflections right now, I want you to make a conscious decision. Do you want to drop the suitcase of worry about the future? And if so, simply drop it. Just drop it. And then standing there in the street with the other suitcase, so heavy in your hands. That suitcase about the past, I want you to make a conscious decision. Do you want to drop it? And if so, just drop it. Just let it go. And as soon as you've dropped those two suitcases, walk into your home, take your seat right where you are and plop down, so relaxed. Like someone coming home from a long trip, dropping suitcases and just relaxing. Resting in the present, just breathing. Resting in the natural well-being of your parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and relaxation response your body knows so well. Just resting in the fundamental well-being of awareness itself. Awareness which doesn't carry worry. Awareness that doesn't carry regret. And resting as if this is meaningful for you. Allowing yourself to simply rest, feeling a sense of peace, feeling a sense of joy, feeling a sense of well-being, a natural happiness that's always your true home. Without carrying heavy suitcases of worries about the future or full of regrets about the past. Simply rest in your body right now with total relaxation throughout your body and your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes, bring yourself back into your space, and you've arrived.